The marble in Rome is always cold, even in the height of summer. People think of it as a city of sun and gold, but if you've lived there, if you've bled there, you know it's a city of shadows and stone. I remember the way his sandals sounded on that stone. A steady, rhythmic asterisk thwap thwap that never faltered, even when the world was screaming at him to stop. He didn't walk like a man. He walked like a force of nature that had decided, for a brief moment, to wear a human face. The boy in the Subura before the world knew him as the man who broke the Republic. I knew him as the boy from the Subura. That was the slum of Rome, a place where the air always smelled of charcoal, cheap wine, and desperation. He wasn't born in a palace. He was born in a crowded apartment block where the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbor's heartbeat. I remember him standing on a balcony when he was barely 17. The city was in a panic. Sulla the dictator was purging his enemies. Blood was literally running in the gutters. Sulla told the boy to divorce his wife, Cornelia. It was a simple command. Do it and live, refuse and die. Most men would have reached for the pen before the sentence was finished. But Caesar, he just looked at the soldiers with those dark, unblinking eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't plead, he just said no. He went into hiding for that no. He slept in the marshes, shivering with fever, moving every night to avoid the blades. Why? Not for politics, not then. He did it because he decided that no man, not even the master of Rome, was allowed to tell him who to love. That was the seed. That was the spark. The Pirates and the Price of a Soul people love the story of the pirates. They tell it in the taverns like it's a comedy. 20 talents, he'd laughed, leaning back against the mast of the pirate ship while they held a knife to his throat. You're selling yourselves short, ask for 50. I'm worth at least that. I was there, huddled in the corner of the deck, terrified out of my mind. The pirates were animals, scarred, brutal men who smelled of salt and rotten fish. But Caesar. He treated the ship like his private villa. He wrote poetry. He made them sit in silence while he practiced his speeches. If they talked during his rehearsals, he'd call them idiots and savages. He'd smile at them, a real charming smile, and say, "Once my family pays you, I'm going to come back and kill every single one of you." They'd roar with laughter. They thought he was the funniest man they'd ever met. They even grew to like him. But I saw his eyes when he wasn't smiling. They were like the bottom of a well, deep, dark, and utterly cold. When the money arrived and he was set free, he didn't go home to his mother. He didn't go to a temple to give thanks. He went to the harbor, hired every mercenary with a boat, and went back. He didn't just kill them, he crucified them. But because he was fond of them, he had their throats slit first so they wouldn't suffer too long. That was Caesar. Mercy and steel, wrapped in a joke you didn't realize was a death sentence until it was too late. The mud of Gaul, then came the years in the north. 10 years. Do you have any idea what 10 years in the mud does to a man? In Gaul, the sky is always gray. The trees are so thick you can't see the sun, and the tribesmen come out of the mist like ghosts. We were hungry, we were tired, and we were 500 miles from anything that looked like home. I remember a night in the winter of 52 BCE. We were outside Alesia. We had built a wall to keep the Gauls in. Then we had to build another wall to keep their reinforcements out. We were trapped in a wooden donut of our own making, starving, surrounded by 250,000 screaming warriors. I was sitting by a small fire, trying to rub the feeling back into my toes. Caesar walked by. He wasn't wearing his fancy general's cloak. He was covered in the same gray mud as the rest of us. He took a piece of hard bread, the kind that tastes like sawdust, and sat down next to me. "Hard night?" he asked. I couldn't even look at him. "We're going to die here, aren't we?" He chewed the bread slowly, looking out at the thousands of enemy campfires twinkling in the dark. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But imagine the stories they'll tell if we don't." He didn't give me a speech about the glory of Rome. He just sat there in the cold until I stopped shaking. He made you feel like if you died, you were doing it for a friend, not a flag. That's how he won. He didn't command us, he seduced us. When the Gauls finally broke, and their king, Vercingetorix, rode out to surrender, he threw his armor at Caesar's feet. Caesar didn't even look down. He just looked at us, his fellow soldiers, as he called us. He had more gold than the treasury of Rome, but he still slept on a bed of straw. The river then came the letters from the Senate. Those fat men in their clean white robes, sitting in Rome, getting rich off the taxes from the lands we had bled for. They were afraid of him. They told him to disband his army. They told him to come home and stand trial like a criminal. We reached the Rubicon in the dead of winter. It's not a big river, it's barely a stream. You could toss a stone across it. But in Rome, a general who crosses that water with an army is a traitor. It was the point of no return. I remember him standing on the bank. He stood there for an hour, just watching the water flow. He looked older. The lines around his eyes were deep, and his hair was thinning. He looked like a man who had realized that his whole life had been a series of doors that only opened one way. If I stay here, he whispered, I am destroyed. If I cross, the world is destroyed. He took a breath. It was a shaky, human breath. Let the die be cast, he said. We stepped into the water. It was freezing. My boots got soaked, and I remember thinking, I hope I don't catch a cold, which is a ridiculous thing to think when you're starting a civil war. We marched on Rome. And the funny thing, nobody fought us. The people opened the gates. They cheered, they threw flowers. They didn't want the Senate and their rules. They wanted the man who knew their names. They wanted the man who promised them a world that worked. The fall, the end didn't happen in a battle. It happened in a meeting. I saw him on the morning of the Ides. He looked tired. He'd been having headaches, and his doctors told him to stay home. His wife, Calpurnia, had dreamed of him covered in blood, but Caesar didn't believe in omens anymore. I think, by then, he believed he was the omen. He walked into the theater of Pompey. He was surrounded by men he had forgiven. That was his greatest mistake. He thought that by showing mercy to his enemies, he could make them friends. He didn't realize that a man will forgive you for hurting him, but he will never forgive you for making him feel small. They crowded around him, pretending to ask for favors. I was standing near the door. I saw Julius grab his robe. I saw the flash of the first blade. It wasn't like the plays. It wasn't noble. It was a pack of dogs tearing at a lion. They were tripping over each other, stabbing wildly. One senator even accidentally cut another in the rush to get a piece of him. He fought at first. He used his stylus, the pen he used to write his histories, to stab a man in the arm, but then he saw Brutus, young Brutus, the boy he had looked after. Some said he was Caesar's own son. Caesar stopped fighting. He didn't say, "Et tu, Brute." He didn't say anything at all. He just looked at the boy with a look of such profound sadness that it seemed to hollow out his chest. He pulled his purple toga over his head. He didn't want them to see him fall. He didn't want to see what they had become. They left him there at the base of the statue of Pompey, the man he had defeated. 23 wet thuds. The floor, that beautiful, cold marble, was stained a color I can still see when I close my eyes. The echo. They thought that by killing the man, they could bring back the old days. They thought they were heroes, but they forgot one thing. Caesar wasn't just a man anymore. He was an idea. He was the ghost that haunted every corner of the city. When his will was read, and the people found out he had left his private gardens to the public, and a sum of money to every single citizen, the city exploded. They didn't want liberty. They wanted their father back. I stood in the forum when they burned his body. The smoke was thick and sweet, rising up into the Roman sky. People were throwing their furniture, their jewelry, even their soldiers' medals into the fire. They wanted to give him everything they had left. I sat on a stone step and watched the embers glow. We spend our lives trying to build walls. We build walls around our cities, around our homes, around our hearts. We think they'll keep us safe. But Caesar showed us that a wall is just a challenge. He crossed the Channel to Britain. He crossed the Rhine into the forests. He crossed the Rubicon into treason. He spent his life crossing lines until there were no lines left to cross. But sitting there, in the cooling ash, I realized the truth he never did. When you break all the rules, when you become the only sun in the sky, you shouldn't be surprised when the world gets burned. He was a giant. And the problem with giants is that when they fall, they crush everyone standing too close. I still have a coin with his face on it. It's worn thin now, the features fading. Sometimes I flip it just to hear that metallic ring. Heads or tails, the die is cast, we're all just waiting for our own Rubicon. We're all just standing on a bank, looking at the water, wondering if we have the courage to get our feet wet, and if we'll be able to live with what's on the other side. The marble is still cold. The city is still here. But the man is just a name we whisper when we want to remember what it feels like to be limitless, and what it costs to stay that way.